So once again, it's a privilege, a schus, and a pleasure to be here with this amazing crowd. And I thank my dear friend, Dr. Friedman, for inviting me once again. I think I've been a guest at this unbelievable event since it was born, since the first year. And b'siyata d'shmaya, b'ezrat Hashem, I look forward. We should be able to get together for many wonderful years to come. The topic we will be discussing this morning, I don't know whether it could be defined as a medical topic, but it is an extremely important discussion for medical professions or for academics in every field who are shomer mitzvahs and yirei shamayim and cling on to our sacred traditions since Ma'amad Har Sinai. How do we deal with many contradictions that seem to be between Torah, Messiah, and scientific discovery? And the questions are many, and the answers are few. So there are, I would say, two common ways to deal with this dilemma. And one would be to say, we know everything and they know nothing. And whatever they say that contradicts halacha is total nonsense. And maybe tomorrow they will be wiser than they are today. And everything that say that goes against halacha is just a total mistake. And that is probably the safest approach for yeshiva boys. You know, tell your children, everything is in according to what we learn in our sacred and our holy books. And whatever they say that doesn't fit in with our tradition is just total nonsense. It is a safe approach for many, but not for all. Because we know that a lot of what they say is true. Some things may change, but many cannot change and will not change. And many scientific truths are truths that cannot change. Approach number two would be, things have changed. And maybe in days of yore, in the days of Chazal, reality was such, and now it is different. And that is an approach that has very firm sources in our tradition in Chazal, but it would not answer all of the questions and problems we have. So after this brief introduction, and before I present maybe approach number three, which would be my feeling, let me just put the problems on the table and the various different contradictions. Psochem Tzaddik Daled Omid Beis, there is a machlokes Chachmei Yisrael and Chachmei Umes Olam. Where does the sun go by night? We see him only in the day. When he goes to bed, where does the sun go? And that was a disagreement between Chachmei Yisrael and Chachmei Umes Olam. Chachmei Yisrael said, the world has like a lid, like a cover, and it's like a dome. And in the morning, between Alois HaShachar and Eitz HaChamo, the sun penetrates from outside the dome, inside the dome. And then throughout the day, he goes from east to west, under the dome. When comes Shkias HaChamo, once again, he penetrates the thickness of the dome, and that takes 72 minutes according to Rabbeinu Tam. And when he's on the other side of the dome, he goes back from west to east on top of the dome, and that's why we can't see him. He is lamala min harakia. So the motion of the sun, according to Chachmei Yisrael, is east to west under the rakia, under the dome. Then he penetrates the dome. He has some kind of a tunnel, west to east on top of the dome. In the morning between Alois and Eitz, once again penetrating the dome from the outer side to the inner side, east to west, west to east. That was Chachmei Yisrael. Chachmei Umes Olam said, by day, the sun goes east to west, mitachas larakia. By night, he goes under the rakia, some kind of a circular motion by day under the dome from east to west. And unlike Chachmi Yisrael, that he penetrates and goes back from west to east, he goes mitachas lakarka. Mitachas lakarka means that Chachmei U'Mesoilam claimed the world is like a platter, and by night the world goes under the earth. And Rebbe says, Nerin divrayem midivreinu. Their opinion seems to be the right one. And why is that? Because in the morning, mayonois chamim, balaylo mayonois chamim, and beboker bayom mayonois tzananim. By night, well water is warm, and that is because the sun warms up the wells from the bottom. That's the discussion in Psochim Tzadik Daled. And then there's a huge controversy, who was right. The Rambam twice in Moreh Nevuchim, the Rambam says, Chachma U'Meso Oilam were right. And Rabbeinu HaKodesh proved they were right, because well water is warmer by night than it is by day. So in Moreh Nevuchim, Chelik Beis, Perek Hey, Chelik Gimel, Perek Yudaled, and the Rambam has a gersa that we do not find in our Shas. Nitzchu Chachmei U'Meso Oilam. They won, as if it's a contest. In our Gemara, Rabbi says, not Nitzchu, not that they were right, but Nerin Divrayem Midvereinu. They seem to be right. So the Rambam twice in Moreh Nevuchim says they were right. And Rabbeinu HaKodesh proved that they were right. Many Gedolim came out against the Rambam. The Rama, in his philosophical work, which is called Toras U'Oilo, Chelik Beis, the Rama says, well, they seem to be right, but our tradition is always correct, and Chachmei Yisrael were right, and not Chachmei U'Mes Ha'olam. That is what the Rama says in Toras U'Oilo. It's actually Rabbeinu Tam. If the Rambam was the greatest of the Sephardi Rishonim, Rabbeinu Tam was number one amongst Balei HaTosfos, and Rabbeinu Tam is in Ksubas Daf Yud Gimel. It's interesting how it gets into Ksubas Yud Gimel. If you wish, check Shitta Mekabetz's Ksubas Yud Gimel, you'll find the connection. But Rabbeinu Tam says, the fact that Rabbeinu HaKodesh says, they seem to be right, doesn't mean that we assume that they were right. We don't have an explanation to this phenomena, why well water is warmer by night than it is by day, but Chachmei Yisrael are always right. And that is what the Chidu writes in Shem HaGedolim Erech Ra'avad. So this is an interesting controversy. If we know anything about astronomy today, it's neither Chachmei Yisrael nor Chachmei Yisrael. We're not aware of a dome that covers the world. And obviously, the sun never goes from west to east, me'al harakia. The world is not like a platter. We know that the world is round. And why is well water warmer by night than it is by day? It is not. Well water always is the same temperature. But if you stick your foot into a well by night, your sensation is that the water is warm because outside it's cold. When you stick your foot into that same well, when the sun is shining outside, it seems to be cold because outside it's warm. And 2,000 years ago, they didn't have the means to actually determine the temperature, and so it was just sensation. So how do we deal with a dilemma as such? And this problem is not only theoretical, it is extremely relevant in halacha. Many of us observe Rabbeinu Tam, as I do. My great Rebbe, the Klozemer Rebbe, that was one of his crusades, Shittas Rabbeinu Tam. And I observe Shittas Rabbeinu Tam. But Rabbeinu Tam's opinion of Tchilas Hashkia and Soif Hashkia is based on the understanding of Chachmei Yisrael. And Rabbeinu Tam says it takes 72 minutes for the sun to penetrate that dome from the inner side to the outer side, and those are the 72 minutes from the Shkia. We lose sight of the sun when it goes into that tunnel, and till Tzeisik Echovim takes 72 minutes. And in the morning, between Alois and Eitz, that is the same time. So if Shittas Rabbeinu Tam is based on that understanding, would it still be relevant today when we think the sun has a totally different idea than both Chachmi Yisrael and Chachma Yisrael? So this is a very relevant question. And I want to put on the table some other similar dilemmas that Gedolei Yisrael struggled with throughout the ages. So in Hilchas Treifus, anybody that learned Perek Gimel and Masechet Chulin, or Hilchas Treifus in your day citing in Siman Lamed Tes, Chai Treifus. There are 18 treifus, 18 blemishes in an animal that will render it treif. And the common denominator of Chai Treifus is Treifa lo chaye. If you have one of these blemishes, the animal cannot live. And in the days of the Rambam and the Rashba, it became obvious some of these treifus could live for many years, and some others are fatal, and they are not included in the list of Chai treifus. And we find two different approaches between the two giants of yore, the Rashba and the Rambam. The Rashba, Tshuvas Rashba Chelek Aleph Siman Tzadik Ches says, Ein lanu ele divrei chachamim. And anybody that tells you he observed an animal for 12 months, it was treif and it didn't die, is either lying or mistaking. It cannot be. So he locked a chicken into a pen and observed it for 12 months, and it's still alive. We assume maybe that original chicken escaped in some way and another came in. Maybe some of your workers tamed the chicken and he didn't tell you. If Chazal say Treifa lo chaya yud beis chodesh, that is a fact. And don't believe anyone that says differently. This Rashba was very reasonable when our question was somebody put a chicken into a pen. But in modern statistics and in the modern world and scientific research, we know certain facts. And therefore the Rambam has a different approach. And the Rambam doesn't say it cannot be. So the Rambam is in Hilchas Shchita, Perek Yud, Halacha Yud Beis, Halacha Yud Gimel, and the Rambam says, well, researchers, scientists say differently, but that does not affect halacha. And the Chazon Ish's understanding in the Rambam is, we do not dispute the facts, but it does not alter halacha. And that is a different approach. Not like the Rashba. And the Rashba says, anybody that will say anything that contradicts our tradition, it is not true. Either he's a blatant liar or he's just mistaken. The Rambam's understanding is different. And the Rambam generally has a lot of respect for general knowledge that comes from other sources. But the Rambam says this will not change Hilchas Treifus. Why not? The Rambam doesn't explain. The Marshal Yamshel Shloima, Perek Gimel Masechet Chulin Siman Pei Aleph, following in his footsteps the Tvuas Shor, one of the greatest commentaries and poskim in Yoredeya, in Siman Lamed and Hilchas in Siman Lamed, and the Chazon Ish, Yoredeya Siman Hey. Their approach in explaining the Rambam is things might have changed. Different mutations, different environment. In the days of Chazal, these were the facts. So many years later, maybe nishtane hateva. Do we find this idea, this argument, things might have changed in other sources? Definitely. And I will bring 5 other sources in which we find the concept things were such and such 2,000 years ago, and throughout the ages, things might have changed in biology, in nature. What are the sources? The Gemara in Chemed Yutes says an animal, a cow, cannot bear offspring before it is 3 years old. And therefore, if an animal is exactly 3 years old and it has offspring, baby, I don't know whether animal babies are called babies. I'm not that fluent in English and sometimes I need some help. But if a baby, a little calf was born to a cow, and we must assume it is a bechor, and it has kedushas bechor, and it's osa bahanoah, because a cow cannot have offspring until it is 3 years old. And Toises on the spot, and also in Avodah Zorah, Daf Chov Dara Domed Beis ask, but we have animals, and they have offspring far before they're 3 years old. And that is a fact we know today as well. So Toises says, Nishtana hateva. Things might have changed. And today animals might have offspring when they are younger than in the past. Cholen Mem Zayin, we're dealing with the question how many lobes the lung of an animal has. Human lungs have 2 lobes. Most animals also have 2 lobes. And in Chazal, it is described as a 3rd lobe, which is called, in the Lashon of Chazal, Inunise de Varda. And the Gemara says that animal would be treifa because kol yeser kinitl dami. If there's an extra, it is as if the original is lacking, and it would be treifa. And Toisa says, most animals, most calves that we have 3 lobes. 2 big one and a smaller one. And that is the derech, and that is very common. And it would be a shocker to say all these animals are treifa. They live many years. Taisa says, maybe things have changed. The Gemara says, and it's also in Even Ezer, Kuf Nun Vav, a woman could not have a child in the middle of the 9th month of pregnancy. Only when she has total 9 months of pregnancy. Oh, there are many women in our audience today, and most of you had babies, and I have many einaklach and some great-grandchildren. I will never say how many. Many of them were born during the 9th month of pregnancy. So we know differently. And it is unreasonable to say they didn't know that. So once again, all the poskim say, maybe things have changed. Source number 5, if we include treifas as source number 1, and could animals nurse before they had a baby? Could they have milk before they ever had offspring? Trumas Edeshen, Reish Ayin Aleph, brings early sources. It is possible. And once again, the relevance of this question would be Kedushas B'choiro. If an animal gives milk in its udder, and we don't know whether it had a child, then we assume that if it has offspring, that is not a B'chor, because it was nursing before. And the Gemara says, no, that's not proof. Some animals have milk even before they had offspring. And the Tumas Edeshen says, all the people we have asked, farmers and biologists, say it's impossible. A woman or lahavdil, an animal, would never have milk to nurse unless she had a baby. And the Tumas Edeshen once again says, Nishtana hateva. In all these sources, it is reasonable. Even if it might seem unlikely, it is reasonable. Genetic mutations, environmental results, influence. There are things do change in hundreds of years, in thousands of years. And it has nothing to do with Darwinian evolution, but more with genetic mutations and the hashpo of environment, maybe medicine, maybe nutrition. Things could change. However, another Gemara in Masechet Chodesh Mem Daled Amud Beis, sperm and urine, do they have the same shvil or two different shvilim? The Gemara says there are two different organs or two different tubes, but we know today, no, there is only one tube. Writes the Chazon Ish in Even HaEzer Siman Yud Beis, maybe things have changed, and this is extremely unreasonable. When Toyota or Honda or Tesla produces a car, a year later there will be a different model, a better model. They learn from experience. The first one had some glitches, some bugs, some problems. Every year they have a new model. It's unreasonable to say HaKadosh Baruch Hu created a man this way and then he decided, I have a better model. It didn't work so well, the first model. And so originally there were two shvilim and today there are one shvil. That is very unreasonable. It has nothing to do with genetic mutations. So this would be unreasonable. So there are different ways in which Achronim explain what seems to be a discrepancy, which I won't go into detail, but there are reasonable explanations to B'miyashev Divrei Chazal. Is the world round or flat? Big question. For many years, people believed the world is flat, and that was Chachmei Umas Olam. And that is why they said, in the morning, the sun travels from east to west on top of the world, from west to east by night on bottom of the world, and that's why the sun warms up the wells from the bottom. In our Ashkofa, it is unclear. The Shvus Yaakov was one of the greatest Gedolim, the greatest Poiskim, and he writes 350 years ago, Shvus Yaakov Chelik Gimel Siman Daled. And he deals with the question, do we trust doctors? Do we trust scientists? And he says, how could we believe anything they say if they say such stupid things as the world is round? That's what the Shvus Yaakov writes. So even 350 years ago, many still believed that the world is flat. So I have a simple solution. If we say Nishtana HaTeva, maybe the world was flat, and at some stage HaKadosh Baruch Hu decided it'll be more interesting, and he blew up the world like a balloon, and the flat world became round. Why are you all laughing? Why are you all laughing? You're laughing because it is a totally unreasonable proposition. Kadosh Baruch Hu created the world as it should be forever, and he didn't come up with a different model, and let's try a round world. Maybe it'll be in many ways more interesting. We'll have more space for people to live. So in some areas, it would be reasonable to say genetic mutations, environmental or nutritional input, but not always. And there are some contradictions which it is unreasonable to say nishtane hateva. And now we're going to have a few examples in which it affects halacha directly, and how do we deal halachically with halachas that are based on assumptions. And today we believe we know that those assumptions are not correct and they have changed. Shinta Zayin Shulchan Aruch Chaim. One of the Lametes Malachas, as you probably know, is Netilas Neshama. You cannot take the life of any living creature. And the Gemara says an ant is like a camel, which means size doesn't matter. It might be a tiny little insect or an elephant or a blue whale, which is the biggest animal that we have in the world. It is the same. If you destroy the life of any living creature, it is a malacha v'natilas neshama. However, kinim are a certain type of lice. There is no isur v'natilas neshama because they are not part of erava. They are not reproduced by male and female like most animals are. They are born spontaneously mina ipush, from dust, from earth, and that is why there is no isur v'natilas neshama. 350 years ago, one of the Gedolim in Italy was Rabbi Yitzchok Lamperonti, and he wrote a sefer Pachad Yitzchok. Pachad Yitzchok is an encyclopedic order. Ois tzadik erech tzeido. And the Pachad Yitzchok, Rabbi Yitzchok Lamperonti writes, this halacha is no longer relevant because we know that there is no insect that comes to be spontaneously out of the dust. All come from reproduction, and therefore there would be a malacha of natilas neshama. He's not coming to propose a kula, but a chumrah. And his Rebbe, Rabbi Yehuda Brill, who was his Rebbe, one of the Gedolim in Italy, and said, you are wrong, and you need to take that word back. We cannot disagree with Chazal, bein lekula, bein lechumrah. Even though you're the frum one, you're not the liberal one that's looking for kulas. Divrei Chazal are stone, and you cannot change any halacha bein lekula ve'bein lechumrah. And he doesn't dispute the scientific recovery. Maybe they're right, but the halacha doesn't change, and it is permissible to kill lice on Shabbos. We had the same discussion 20 years ago regarding the anisakis. The anisakis is a parasite, a worm that is found in the belly or in the flesh of fish. And Chazal say, and that is a sif in Shulchan Aruch Pei Dalet Sif Tei Zayin. Worms that are found in the bowels and the belly of a fish are asur, because the fish swallowed those worms and they come to be by reproduction. But the ones found in the flesh of the fish are mutar, because that is where they come to be spontaneously. Flesh of fish breeds parasites. That's the Messiah of Chazal. 20 years ago, it became obvious in Israel and maybe in America that there's a parasite, the anisakis, and it is found in the flesh of the fish. Some Gedolim said, it's a sif in Shulchan Aruch. You could eat those fish despite of the parasites in their flesh. My Rebbe, the Kloisenberger Rebbe, said it's a sif in Shulchan Aruch and it's mutar. Rav Elyashiv, one of the Gedolei Ador living in Yerushalayim, said, but we know the scientists say it's the same parasite. And the way it gets into the flesh is, it bores a hole in the intestines and it gets into the flesh. But the Kloisenberger Rebbe said, but it's a sif in Shulchan Aruch. They didn't know. I stopped eating herring. I think the Kloisenberger Rebbe is right, but who would want to eat worms? It's just repulsive. So I said, I don't care who's right and who's wrong, but if herring has worms, maybe it's balteshakzu, maybe it's not an issue of toiloim. It is the same dilemma. Chazal are mekel, based on what they thought is scientific truth. Maybe we know better today. Should we be machmir? One hashkafa would say, if this is true, then the halacha is no longer relevant. And the other would say, but if it's in the Shulchan Aruch, do we have the authority to say they had a mistake? And it's in the Shulchan Aruch from the Gemara, and that is Torah Shebal Peh. Hundreds of years ago, a child was never circumcised unless they had hot water. And there's a big discussion in the Gemara. They prepared hot water for Amila Bisman on Shabbos, and then a child bumped into the table and the hot water was spilled over and we cannot do milah. What do? How could we boil water on Shabbos? Amira lenochi, in order we should be able to makayim the mitzvah milah bizmano. And the Shulchan Aruch writes in Shin Amud Aleph Sif Tes, in days of yore, it was a sakona to circumcise a child if you don't have hot water, but we don't do that any longer. We all circumcised children, many children, Baruch Hashem. We all were present, and we never saw washing a baby with boiling water before the bris, neither after the bris. We don't do that any longer. And the Mishnah Berurah writes, Nishtana HaTeva. Exactly which Teva was Nishtana, we don't know. But the Shulchan Aruch clearly says, as far as we know, there is no need to wash a baby with hot water before or after the bris. Therefore, we no longer do that. So in Hilchos Shabbos, when do we disregard halacha? And the question is twofold, lekula v'lechumra. In Shulchan Aruch, every wound on the back of your hand, opposite the palm, is a chodesh yesh b'Sakona, you're machal Shabbos. We don't do that any longer. Child cuts his hand. Well, we give him a kiss. We apply some pressure. If need, you put on a Band-Aid, and that's a Hilchos Shabbos question, and you stay home, and you're not worried. Makeh shel barzel, any wound that is made by a metal object, chodesh yesh b'Sakona. No longer. Why have these halachas changed? So what I explained to my Talmidim many times, if we have a reasonable explanation why once it was a sakona and no longer, then we change halacha. There is a very reasonable explanation why a wound from a metal object was once upon a time a chodesh yesh b'Sakona. They weren't aware of tetanus. Tetanus bacteria thrives in darkness. Light, sunlight, destroys tetanus bacteria. And in metal objects, once rust was very common. They didn't have stainless steel. And tetanus thrives under rust. And many utensils were rusty. And that was a grave sakona. They didn't have any chisun for tetanus, and therefore it was a killer. So we explain why Makeh shel barzel once was a grave sakona. They observed and they saw people getting a cut from a rusty knife, and the person died. On the back of your hand, there are blood vessels right under the skin. If you had a wound, and sometimes people bled to death. The Baz writes in a tshuva, I saw a person that had a cut in his ear and he bled to death. Obviously, that they had hemophilia. They weren't aware of this sickness and they had no way to treat it. So if you had a wound, like on your palm, the inside of your palm, or the back of your hand, and there was profuse bleeding, and that was considered a sakona. No longer. And therefore, we understand why it was a sakona in days of yore and no longer. Makeh shel cholon, every internal ailment was a sakona. Yes, they didn't have x-rays. Needless to say, CT and MRI, and today we know what's happening in our body, but once upon a time we did not. So every makeh shel cholon, every internal ailment might have been a sakona. Not that it had much to do if it was a sakona, but so in many areas in Hilchos Shabbos we could explain why it was considered a sakona, and then we follow present-day medicine. A person would be insane to be machal Shabbos if you had a cut in the back of your hand, or if a little Shabbos-dik knife cuts your finger. We're not machal Shabbos because it is no longer a sakona, and we can understand why once it was a sakona. Why did they need to boil water before a bris? Well, to wash the sakin shel milah, to kill the bacteria, maybe. What they saw is if you do the knife without washing it with boiling water, sometimes children died. And if you use hot water, they lived. So how do we deal with mitsita? According to Chazal, if you don't do mitsita, it's a sakona, the baby might die. No doctor today knows how to explain. Millions of children are circumcised without mitsita, and they don't die. So why do we still do mitsita? The Teferes Yisrael in Perek Yutes Masechet Shabbos deals with this dilemma. And he spoke to doctors. And doctor says, mitsita is not necessarily by every baby, but there is a certain illness, a certain medical condition in which you don't do mitsita, the baby's life might be in jeopardy, and therefore we should still do mitsita. We're not aware what that ailment is that necessitates mitsita. Hanach lebnei Yisrael. And what I say now is specifically regarding mitsita. According to the Zohar and the Mekubalim, mitsita is an integral part of mitzvahs mila, contrary to the Bavli, that is just to prevent Sakona. It is part of this most precious mitzvah, which is the symbol of a Jew, and therefore it is Doiche Shabbos. And this brings us to a broader discussion which we will not deal with today. When do we rely on Kabbalah in Halachic ruling? But it is clear to me, mitsita no longer depends whether it's a sakona or not if you do not do mitsita. Anach lebnei Yisrael lo naviim mem b'nei naviim mem. And mitsita is an integral part of mitzvahs mila, and it's doiche Shabbos. That is our tradition and that is our reality. But coming back to the broader question. So after all these svekas and dilemmas and problematic sources, let me share with you my hashkafa, and I think this is the most sensible, valid, and calming approach. 3 times in Shas, we find a Gemara, which essentially is Agadata. But the Chazon Ish had a new blick, a new vision on this Agadata. Avodah Zorah, Rosh Hashanah, Sanhedrin, 3 times in Shas, Chazai Shit, Alfin Shnin, Havi Alme. The world in its present form will exist for 6,000 years. And those 6,000 years are 3 times 2. Alpayim Shnois Toihu. Alpayim Shnois Toiro. Alpayim Shnois Yemois HaMoshiach. And we are approaching the end of Yemois HaMoshiach. The Chazon Ish, I use the Chazon Ish as a springboard, as a basis. But the Chazon Ish deals with Hilchas Treifus, with the dilemma in which the Rambam and the Rashba struggle with. And the Chazon Ish says, Halacha is based on the world of Soif Alpayim Shnois Toiro. And that is a milestone. It's not just a historical date. The basis of Torah Shabbal Peh is the Talmud, Mishnah, and Gemara. And Chazal say the Gemara is Soif Hoiroah. It is the end of halachic ruling. So the Chazon Ish says we must assume that in Soif Alpayim Shnois Torah, that is 1,700 years ago, Chasimas HaTalmud, that was the Matzav and Treifus. These 18 couldn't live, others could live. And what happens later no longer affects halacha. So the Chazon Ish's approach is based on the significance of Alpayim Shnois Torah. The Chazon Ish writes that coincides with Sof Chasimas HaTalmud. I think it coincides with Sof Tkufas HaMishnah, but it doesn't really make a difference because the Talmud is commentary. And the Yesodas HaHalacha are the Tanoim, and that is Tkufas HaMishnah. But my approach is slightly different than the Chazon Ish, and I want to give a brief introduction. One time every day, we define HaKadosh Baruch Hu as Noisein HaTorah. Berchas HaTorah in the morning. Baruch Atu Hashem Noisein HaTorah. 100 times every day, we describe and define HaKadosh Baruch Hu in a different way as Melech HaOlam. And some of us don't realize that HaKadosh Baruch Hu not only gave us Torah, HaKadosh Baruch Hu created the world. And he created all the amazing laws of nature. They didn't happen. So HaKadosh Baruch Hu is the Mad'an Rashi. In Eretz Yisrael, there's a tafkid, the Mad'an Rashi. He's the prime scientist. And he created all the laws, physics, chemistry, biology, astronomy, hydrodynamics. Probably I could read off a list, I'm not a scientist, of 100 different names and definitions. They were all created by HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Not only that, it is HaKadosh Baruch Hu that decided that the laws of nature will be an unending quest, and never will we understand all the laws of nature. And there is not one area in science where the scientists would say, we figured it all out, let's move on to another area. So in thermodynamics, there's no longer any need for research. In nuclear physics, no longer, no. Science by its very nature, and that is the way HaKadosh Baruch Hu wanted it to be. Science is all about discovery. Halacha is all about transmission. So halachic reality was never meant to be based on scientific reality. It cannot possibly be based on scientific reality because these two disciplines are totally different in nature. Science is an ever-changing landscape, and there's not one area in science which we figured it all out. So science is a never-ending quest of discovery. What we know today, we will know more tomorrow. What we'll know a day after tomorrow, we don't know today. And that is exactly the way HaKadosh Baruch Hu created the world, and he wanted it to be. Halacha is all about transmission. Fathers teach children, and their children will teach their children. And alpayim shnois Torah, that is the tipping point. So I say, and this is why I differ from the Chazon Ish, we do no longer need to say nature has changed. B'soif alpayim shnois Torah, HaKadosh Baruch Hu tells Chachmi Yisrael, look around. And the way science manifests itself in your eyes, now and here, will be forever the basis of halachic reality. Halachic reality was never meant to be based on scientific reality. It cannot be. Because science will change, and halacha cannot change. So the significance of Alpayim Shnois Torah, unlike the Chazon Ish, is not the way the world was in that point of time. It is the way the world manifested itself in the eyes of Chazal. What they saw and what they thought at that time is destined by HaKadosh Baruch Hu to forever be the basis of halachic reality. And if they saw kiddim that are created spontaneously, and parasites that are born in the flesh of fish, they might have been mistaken, but that is not relevant. If that is what they saw, that is forever the basis of halachic reality. And if it seemed to Chachmi Yisrael to be day and night, where does the sun go to sleep? Where does the sun go? If that is what Chachmi Yisrael thought, that is the basis of halachic reality forever, and that is why we still adhere to Shittas Rabbeinu Tam. So, this is no deficiency in halacha. That is the way HaKadosh Baruch Hu planned his world, and that is the way HaKadosh Baruch Hu wants it to be. And the significance of Soif Alpayim Shnois Torah is not the way it was. It is the way it seemed to be in the eyes of Chazal. All Chazal had is their eyes and their minds and their hearts. And what they saw when they laid the basis of halacha forever. That is the life of halacha. And halacha has its own life. And it is not based and never was meant to be based on scientific reality. And this approach solves all the problems. There are no contradictions between halacha and science, and there cannot be. These are two disciplines which were never meant to live together. And Alpayim Shnois Torah is the period in which it was Chazal's duty to define the basis of halacha for all the coming generations. And that is, as Chazal describe, Soif Hoiroa. Soif Hoiroa means these are the fundamentals that will be with us for all the coming generations. Who knows when a Soif Zman Kriya Shema? Every day in the morning. Soif Zman Kriya Shema. How many hours from sunrise? Gimel Shois. Machlokes Magen Avraham, Shulchan Aruch Harav, Gimel Shois from the Elois, from the Nates. And in the book, Brocha says, Zman Kimis Malachim, when kings and monarchs get up in the morning. Why don't we do a survey every 10 years when kings get up in the morning? I think yeshiva boys will be so happy. We will discover that, they get up after 10 o'clock in the morning. Because what do kings do today? They go to parties. They don't do much more. And probably they go to sleep very late at night. They get up late in the morning, and we could give yeshiva boys another 2 or 3 hours to sleep every morning before Sof Zman Kriya Shema. No. It is no longer relevant when kings get up today. Chazal, Sof Alpayim Shnois Torah, looked around. They probably made a survey in their times. When do kings get up? And that is halacha forever. So I think this approach to the many contradictions between halacha and science, that is only my opinion. I find this to be the most satisfying approach, which does away with all the kashas and all the contradictions. And to me, it's not a b'diavad. To me, this makes so much sense, and I could see it no differently. I could see it no differently. And the basis of what I taught you today is understanding. It is all from HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Science is from HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Scientific discovery is from HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Halacha is from HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And they cannot possibly go together. Science evolves. Science is all about discovery. Science is a changing and ever-changing landscape. Halacha is transmission. Halacha was determined in days of yore. Halacha was determined by Chazal, and all that the Rishonim and the Achronim do is just trying to understand Chazal. So there are no contradictions between Halacha and science because there cannot be. They talk two different languages, and they are based on two different realities. So this is a very, very broad discussion, and it's the first time I speak about this in public, and I was contemplating because I know some people will find it very difficult to accept and understand, but I think most intelligent people will very much cherish what we explained today because I think this is a more valid answer than all the others. Yashir Koyach.